On today's show, Houston Rockets headline roulette. John Lucas moves into the front office and will not be joining Ime Udoka's coaching staff. The Rockets are looking to add one more guard via free agency, and the role of Jae'Sean Tate moving forward on this Rockets team. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day. Shout out to our everydayers every single day. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, none other than the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose. And Ben, it has been a whirlwind of a few days. Rockets free agency in full force. We have broken down and dissected a lot of the free agency moves up to this point. But in addition to free agency, we have a plethora of Rockets headlines to tackle on today's shows. Little, news and notes relevant to the larger scope of what the Rockets are trying to do here. So we're going to play headline roulette. And the way headline roulette works is I have all the headlines stacked up over here. We've got 6 different headlines to get through on today's show. Pick a number 1 through 6. Ben, let's go ahead and just randomly tackle these topics one at a time.
4.
4, okay.
It's the Jalen Green number. Come on.
Jalen Green number it is. Ime Udoka officially announces his coaching staff. Now, this is one that we had, reporting about a lot of the names on the staff, but it is now official. We can go through the list of names here in just a second. If I can find I should have prepared this. This is what terrible podcast hosting looks like, Ben, if you want to carry the show for 2 seconds.
Yeah, so we know they've got Ben Sullivan and Cam Hodges. Those are the two that jump out to me the most because there's an emphasis on shooting. Now, the Rockets will push back when you ask them, no, they're overall coaches. They have a diverse skill set that goes far and beyond just shooting. But look, we talk about shooting a lot. That's something that's been a weakness the last couple of years. And you need guys that have a proven track record to lift guys like Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. to the next level. That's what's so important. Is it's not just about bringing in shooting externally. There's been a lot of focus on that, and perhaps Fred VanVleet plays into that, and we'll see if there's any other additions the Rockets have. Spoiler alert, that's going to be another one of your headline roulettes, I suspect. But I do think that overall, bringing in guys that can elevate the players internally, in a lot of ways for sure, but shooting is one of them. So Ben Sullivan, Cam Hodges, those are 2 guys. Sullivan with the Celtics, Hodges with the Clippers, that I'm particularly excited about.
The full list of names on Ime Udoka's coaching staff: Ben Sullivan, Royal Ivey, Garrett Jackson, Tiago Splitter, Cam Hodges, and Mike Moser. Tiago Splitter was, I guess, the most recent addition. A lot of these other names we kind of saw, I won't say early on in the process, but a lot of them have been reported. Royal Ivey was the first one, then the chunk of guys coming over from Joe Mazzulla's staff in Boston, the holdovers from when Ime Udoka was still the coach there. And then Tiago Splitter is a guy that goes back to the San Antonio Spurs connection days, right? Another guy coming off that Popovich coaching tree. I actually really like the Tiago Splitter one because I think he's going to be really beneficial for some of the bigs on the roster and could be really helpful to Alperen Sengun especially.
Yeah, and you're going to have to lean on Sengun even more now that you didn't get Brook Lopez, and it's clear that Sengun is going to be that starter. There's not going to be the timeshare arrangement of 24-24 the way a lot of people speculated when Lopez and the Rockets were rumored for weeks as a potential connection. Look, the one thing that you can say negatively about this staff is that there's not a lot of proven experience. These are all very young guys, and Ime has talked about wanting to have a staff that's very energetic, and I think the ages play into that. But the other part of it too, look, you can point out, and rightfully so, that Ime has only been a head coach for 1 year in the NBA. But look, he had substantial leverage. You've got to trust him that he knows what he's doing. First off, he chose the Rockets in part because I'm sure they gave him a lot of control, but you can't just pick and choose. One of my little pet peeves during this offseason, I'll use an example during the past week in free agency. A lot of people were celebrating this whole idea when it was clear that Ime was a big factor in the Rockets pivoting from James Harden to Fred VanVleet as far as their target, because, I've been a Harden guy for months, and I think it's undeniable. James Harden was a better basketball player in a vacuum than Fred VanVleet last season. However, the Rockets and Ime Udoka in particular seem to think that Fred is a better fit for this roster, which I will buy because it's a team sport. And so culture factors do matter. In the case of, you mentioned Sengun. How do Harden and Sengun potentially fare defensively? Probably not that well. There's also the locker room. There's practice habits. There's all sorts of things that you're trying to do when you're molding young guys into winners. And the Rockets and Ime in particular seem to believe that Fred was the guy. So I'm on board. Let's give him that benefit of the doubt. Well, the same holds true with other things as well. There's been a lot of what-ifing about Dillon Brooks the last few days. Look, Dillon Brooks is clearly a guy that Ime wanted. Those rumors between Dillon and the Rockets really cranked up after Ime was named head coach. And we know he has a lot of influence on personnel. He can be that powerful guy. He's bigger than Bruce Brown. He's done it against starting quality players before, which is different than Brown. He's only 27 years old. I know the 4-year contract was a little steep, but look, all it takes is one team offering the MLE, and all of a sudden the Rockets are in a tough spot. You have to add in the loser tax on top of that. I know you've covered that in past shows, but look, you can't just pick and choose when you apply your I trust Ime Udoka. I think Dillon Brooks was Ime's guy, someone that could come in and bring in the Marcus Smart type defensive culture. So the Rockets went out and got him, even if they had to pay a bit of a premium to do so. And to spin it back to the coaching staff, look, there's not a lot of proven experience, but this is the way Ime wants it. So if you spend heavily on a head coach, which the Rockets did, someone that, we heard the Jock Landale interview that he views as arguably one of the best coaches in the NBA, then you've got to trust him on some things. And as it pertains to the coaching staff, yeah, there's not a lot of experience, but Ime seems to think that's fine. So I think it just fits with the broader theme of the offseason, trust in Ime.
And speaking of, we're going to dovetail into one of these other headlines here just because it makes a ton of sense to talk about it right now. John Lucas heading into the Rockets front office. So that was one of the big points of speculation this offseason. Would Mahmoud Abdel-Fattah or John Lucas actually stay a part of Ime Udoka's coaching staff moving forward? Those were the two names most likely to stick around. And unfortunately, Mahmoud is taking over the head coach role of the Sydney Kings, I believe, the team that Jae'Sean Tate used to play for.
Yes.
So he'll be down in Australia. And then John Lucas is being moved into the front office. And this was a move, Ben, that we speculated here on this podcast would actually take place if the Rockets did not ultimately decide to, or if Ime Udoka ultimately decided not to have John Lucas on his assistant coaching staff. And, I'm kind of torn on it because, like you alluded to and pointed out, there isn't a ton of experience on this coaching staff. It's one of the younger coaching staffs in the league.
Yeah.
Ime Udoka with just the 1 year of true head coaching experience, albeit he was very successful in that 1 year. I still wonder, would it have been beneficial to have a guy like John Lucas on the bench, a guy that can be kind of that, that elder statesman, so to speak, to kind of help guide some of the other. But I also understand the idea of it being Ime wanted to establish his vision for the team, his culture, and not necessarily having any holdovers from the previous regime where maybe John Lucas makes a decision where he's like, oh, well, we used to do this. And Ime's like, well, yeah, we're not doing that anymore, right? Like, I want to do things my way. And not that there would have been a power struggle between those two, because I think John Lucas would be flexible and respect. Absolutely, right? He never stepped on Stephen Silas's toes as a head coach, even though he was clearly the guy with more NBA experience, in his life than Stephen Silas had to that point. But I like the move. It keeps John Lucas a part of the organization, and I'm sure that his front office role won't exactly be like crunching advanced analytics numbers next to Rafael Stone and picking targets and whatnot, but just kind of in a consultant role. And I'm sure we'll still see him on the basketball court from time to time with the other coaches.
Right. I think the bigger thing is just keeping him in the organization. And I do think it's Rafael Stone showing that there is some value in those intangible factors, because we know that John Lucas was a really important resource for these developing young guys. Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Porter Jr., Alperen Sengun. They all leaned on Lucas a lot the last couple of years. And I think to have him leave the organization altogether would be really rough. It's not even so much about the games and how they talk on the bench. It's more just the day-to-day, having Lucas around the organization, on the practice court at times, as just a resource that's in the building that they can communicate with and someone that they still feel like is on their team. The fact that he's still going to be there, to me, Lucas is a useful bridge between the Stephen Silas era and the Ime Udoka era. And so I think keeping him around, even if he's not the coach, I think just keeping him in the organization, you can make those young guys feel a lot more comfortable that their guy is still around. Because Jackson, you're around every day. You know, a lot of those young prospects, Lucas is their guy. And it goes deeper than just him being an assistant coach and who they talk to during games. No, it's the day-to-day activity as it pertains to the 7 months or so that you're basically making this your livelihood for 70, 80 hours a week. He is an enormous resource to those young guys. And the fact that he's still in the organization, I think, Rafael Stone deserves a little bit of credit for this, because it's a tacit acknowledgement that there is something when you're developing young players. You can't just throw them out there and assume that everything's going to work out. There is something to be said for the intangible factors, putting guys in the right space mentally. And so I think this can be sort of a bridge. I think Ime wants his own staff. Youth and energy are themes we've heard a lot, but there's value to Lucas as a person as well. And so this is sort of the best way to blend the two and keep him around as a resource for those young guys that you're still trying to develop.
Coming up, Rockets headline roulette continues. Are the Rockets looking to add one more guard via free agency? Some of the names possibly out there on the market. And how do they view Jae'Sean Tate internally as a piece moving forward? We're going to get there in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to over-under to who you think is going to be first to hit a home run, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, pick a number between 1 and 2.
1. It's
All
Amen
right.
Thompson.
It's there we go. The Amen Thompson number. I love that we're just going to keep linking these back to jersey numbers. This is amazing. All right. The Rockets are looking to add and this was a legit toss-up between the adding a guard or talking about Jae'Sean Tate. We'll get to Jae'Sean Tate in a minute. The Rockets are reportedly looking to add one more guard via free agency. That's, we kind of have speculated that they weren't exactly done making moves, that they were probably done making, I guess, quote unquote, big moves this offseason. But it does seem like they want to add one more kind of like combo guard type piece. And the way that I've thought about this, Ben, is they probably want to add a piece that's very similar to the Jeff Green role, essentially, where maybe not a player quite as long in the tooth as Uncle Jeff is, but a player that basically would be content with the idea of inconsistent minutes, can step in when necessary, probably I think a specialist kind of guy, somebody that could bring some shooting. We know that shooting has been a recurring theme throughout this Rockets offseason. It's been an area of emphasis that they've stressed that they need to get better at and also add from the free agency pool, a talent pool that they could kind of get. And there's a bunch of names out there that I think would be interesting fits to kind of bring to this Rockets team with that in mind. Do you want me to reel off some of my options, or do you have any names in mind that you want to tackle first?
Yeah, the three that jumped out to me, Austin Rivers, Kendrick Nunn, and Terrence Ross. They each bring different things with regards to, Rivers isn't as much of a shooter, but he's more diverse in his overall skill set. And I talked in segment 1 about the benefits of bringing in Fred relative to Harden. Besides defense and culture, another potential benefit is that you can use Fred off the ball a bit more. So perhaps that plays into, the combo guard, someone that can actually handle the ball a bit more so that you can let Fred be, I suppose, one of your shooting additions. The same way you could also argue for Kevin Porter Jr. in that role, in that it's not so much that you have to bring in a shooter. You can use the guys on your roster in different ways if you let them function off the ball more, and then they can potentially fill that shooting gap. So there's multiple ways you can go about it. You could bring in a Rivers type who can handle the ball a little bit, and then let some of your internal guys, Fred and Kevin, be your shooters, if you will. And you can also just simply bring in a volume 3-point shooter like a Terrence Ross and let him be this year's version of Garrison Matthews or Gary Bird. So there's multiple ways you could go about it. But at the end of the day, I think it's definitely a need. And just one thing I'll point out real quickly, I think now that the Rockets are trying to win, it's very important to have some internal replacements to guys who could potentially be tradable salary. So since the Rockets are capped out and we talk about trades the rest of the offseason or leading up to the deadline, their easiest salaries to trade, both from a financial standpoint, their short-term deals, and also their players that aren't particularly important to the puzzle here, not guys that you're leaning on to play 30, 35 minutes a night. Your tradable salaries are Jae'Sean Tate and Kevin Porter Jr. So it would help, for example, if you trade Jae'Sean Tate, well, you do have Jeff Green as someone that can step into somewhat of a similar role and fill that production without there being a huge hit to your team. So if you bring in a combo guard, then if you need Kevin Porter Jr. as a tradable salary at some point, then in theory, that player can potentially take on a slightly increased role in the event that KPJ isn't here, because you need to use that short-term salary filler to address some other need. So that's just a small factor I would keep in mind. In terms of building your roster, didn't matter so much the last couple of years because the Rockets weren't trying to win. Now that you're trying to win, you can bring in, you already got a Jeff Green, and now you bring in a combo guard, and that gives you some insurance for KPJ and Jae'Sean Tate in case you need to use them in a trade down the line.
No, I fully agree. That's a great point to be made, and I think that the only other name that I would kind of toss into the hat here is Aaron Holiday. Actually, I think that he could be an interesting name. I love the idea of adding Austin Rivers. I've talked about on this show before bringing Austin Rivers back as kind of a veteran mentor type. I really think that
also a quote machine
for sure, right? I really think that Rivers could be a guy to really help Jalen Green in his approach to the game, because they're both very similar in kind of their build, their body, their game type. Obviously, Jalen's the much more explosive athlete, but I'm talking about kind of that quick twitch, slender, slight of frame, relies on the explosive first step. I think, if Rockets fans remember back to when Austin Reeves was previously on this team, back when he was Houston Bayous, his adopted Houston nickname, he had this one move where the Rockets would empty out. They'd do an empty corner action with Austin Rivers in isolation, and all he would do is do a quick, hezzy move and then blow by his defender, and he would get to his inside hand. So if he was on the right wing, he'd switch to the left and, kiss the ball off the glass, or if he was on the left wing, he'd get to his inside hand and get to the right, and he used that speed, but also the pace and being able to get past the defender, slow down right at the rim and make that shot. And I really think that's an area that Jalen has kind of struggled into this point, is he knows how to beat a guy off the dribble, or how to use his speed, how to use that first step. It's his decision-making when he gets to the cup, right? His touch, his craft, finishing around the rim. And I really do think a guy like Austin Rivers, who has a similar approach to how he attacks the basket at times, could be really beneficial to Jalen in that regard. The Aaron Holiday bit, though, I like Aaron Holiday mainly because he's shot over 40% from three the past 2 seasons. He would be a great infusion of shooting, although he doesn't necessarily quite fit the combo guard role because he's a 6-foot-tall guard. So you don't exactly get the size that you'd be comfortable with trotting him out as a 1 or a 2, the same way you would with Rivers or a couple of the other names, Kendrick Nunn, on that list. But I do think that's an interesting crop of guys, and the Rockets are very much set, I think, on adding at least one more name for a lot of the points that you already mapped out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that could happen sooner rather than later, because if they want to roll that room exception over into the season, which could be useful, the room exception, nearly $8 million a year in annual starting salary, then they need to use their cap room, if that's what they want to use, to bring in one of these guys this week before the deals become official, which can start happening Thursday once the moratorium ends. So if you want to have that flexibility of the room exception and being able to, potentially use that during the year, should someone you like potentially shake free, then you need to try and go after one of those guys this year so that you can sequence it in the right way.
We got one more
this week, I should say.
Good point. But before we get to the kind of Jae'Sean Tate discussion, because I feel like that's going to be that's one of the more polarizing discussions amongst Rockets fans at this point. We do have one other little headline that we'll get to here. We knew it was reported, but that Tari and Jabari will be joining the Rockets in Summer League. At least that's how things look right now. We know that Ben Sullivan is going to be the Summer League head coach, which means that we're going to see a starting lineup of Ime Thompson, Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith Jr. Just those 4 guys, that's going to be insane. Yeah. A ton of fun to watch, assuming, again, Jabari probably plays the 5 in Summer League like he did last year in the absence of Usman Garuba. The real question, Ben, is with Ty Washington being moved, who is going to be the 5th starter next to those guys? And I'm going to put my money on none other than Trevor Hudgens.
Yeah, I think it is. It's got to be. Look, there's a reason why. I know some Rockets fans, between his age and just his overall, I suppose, profile, are skeptical on Hudgens. But look, they've already given him a 2-way for next year. I know you can back out of that if you want, but that signals that they do have some interest. So yeah, I think they are on the side of a guy that's under contract with them in some capacity, is going to be in training camp. So yeah, I think Hudgens is the 5th guy. Granted, I would be surprised if Jabari and Tari play more than 1 game, 2 at the most, but that's going to be an absolutely loaded lineup for what limited portions we actually get to see. I
genuinely wonder if some of the reasoning might have been, hey, we want to give Amin some weapons to work with in Summer League, right?
Yeah, because perhaps to see what happens, because otherwise the Rockets are not very deep with regards to, second-round picks, undrafted free agents. They haven't had their pick of the litter in recent years. So yeah, you do need to have at least a game or 2 where let's see what happens when Amin runs the show and he has guys that he can actually dish to. That's a good point. And yeah, to your point about Jabari playing the 5, that's an underrated silver lining of not getting Brook Lopez. Look, it generally sucks, but you can try some other things. Look, Jabari Smith Jr. showed some flashes at the 5 last year. There may be lineups where you can do that. Jae'Sean Tate, they used him at the 5 in previous years. That could be an option. Jock Landale, I think, there's little things to like about him as far as a guy who does the dirty work, to use his words from the interview he gave with ESPN a couple of days ago. So, you can sort of mix and match and try different things. And yeah, Jabari at the 5, a guy who can really space the floor and let you play 5 out. Sure, let's see how that goes.
And one small other note here about the Summer League roster. It is hilarious to me that the guys who are actually a part of the Rockets team already, the current, players, the 2-way guys, they all get their number. So Amin is 1, Darius Days is on the roster. He's number 5, Cam Whitmore 7, Jabari 10, Trevor is 12, Tari 17. Then every other player on the roster, it literally just goes down the number from 54 to 65. They're not getting to pick jersey numbers.
There's like 6 guys in the 60s and there's no 69. Come on.
I know, right? We were this close to greatness, Ben. So close. We'll file an official complaint with the Rockets and with the Summer League Jersey Committee to make sure that we can get this addressed for subsequent years. On that note, coming up, we're going to get into our final Rockets headlines. Ben is very clearly itching to talk about Jock. Jock. Oh, what an amazing transition. All right. And we've also got to discuss Jae'Sean Tate. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything at Houston Rockets basketball. Now, before we get to our Jae'Sean Tate headline, the other headline, one of the Houston Rockets' newest additions, Jock Landale, sat down and did an interview with ESPN Australia and kind of was asked about his thoughts on coming to the Houston Rockets, what he could provide to the team, his impressions so far, kind of as an outsider looking in, but also as somebody who's had a couple conversations already to this point with Ime Udoka and kind of understands the direction and vision for this team and his role on this team. Ben, do you want to start with a highlight of yours from this interview?
Yeah, I just love that he said that he's embracing doing the dirty work, because that's what the Rockets need as a complement to Alperen Sengun, someone that's willing to do the little things, defend at a high level, protect the rim, set the hard screens. Look, you know what Sengun can do as a potential offensive hub and his game as a playmaker. What you need is someone for the more defensive-oriented matchups where you need rim protection. And that's something that the Rockets internally don't really have. We talked earlier about, some small ball options, guys like Jabari Smith Jr. or Jae'Sean Tate at the 5. Well, they're not going to give you much in the way of rim protection. So you need someone with a physical body that's willing to throw his weight around. And that's something we saw from Jock Landale in the playoffs. Look, Monty Williams, there were matchups where in certain games where he just thought DeAndre Ayton was a bit too soft, and they turned to Jock Landale, and he delivered even in just his second NBA season. He's a bit older. He's 27 years old now, but this is just his 3rd NBA season. He's an international guy from Australia, so his career got started a little bit later, the same way Jae'Sean Tate, the last couple of years with the Rockets we've seen. Look, I think Jock can play. And I think, kudos to the Dallas Mavericks for potentially, if you believe Mark Stein's reporting, saving the Rockets from themselves. There was a report that came out Monday night that the Rockets actually prioritized, after not getting Brook Lopez, Dwight Powell before the Mavs increased their offer a little bit, kept him, and then the Rockets went after Landale. look, Landale's younger than Dwight Powell. He's better defensively. He's also someone that, because of the creative structure, he's on a 4-year deal, only the first year guaranteed. So he's incentivized to keep playing hard. And if he does, then you can keep him at a very inexpensive rate as your backup 5 for up to 4 years, tons of club control. To me, that's a really good deal. I don't understand why the Rockets had Dwight Powell. I guess he's a slightly better rim runner, but in terms of what they need defensively, Landale checks a lot more boxes. So to me, again, the Rockets might have gotten a little bit lucky with how they landed on him, but I think he's a great fit. He seems to have a great attitude, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do.
Couple of the quotes from the Landale interview. He says, when I spoke to Ime, he said, you've got to come in and earn it just like everyone else, which is that recurring theme, right? For going back to the rookie introductory press conference. He says, I think that's a healthy style of competition. And back to the quote that you were alluding to, Ben, he goes on to say, that'll be the message I try to impart on everyone is, every team needs a guy willing to sacrifice their own numbers and bodies and all of that to go out there and help the superstars get loose and make their lives easier. That's where I'm really handy, and figured that out with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, is they needed someone who was willing to do the dirty work for them. That's the role I see myself sticking in for a long time, and I'm completely happy with that. I love it. That type of mentality is going to be invaluable for this Rockets team, and it's going to be incredible to see when the Rockets elect to start Jock Landale over Alperen Sengun.
The Bruno Fernando part 2?
Yeah, Bruno Fernando part 2, Australian Boogaloo at this point. All right, we tackled the Jock itch.
Oh my God.
I'm not letting this one go. This is going to be a recurring theme now. I should not have walked into that phrasing. All right. We tackled that. We've tackled all of our other headlines. Our final headline here to get to, make sure that I didn't actually skip any. Yeah, we're good. Jae'Sean Tate as a piece moving forward for this Rockets team. And apparently it looks like a piece that Ime Udoka is fond of. I feel like there's this like internal frustration at this point, Ben, with Jae'Sean Tate as a player. And I've been one of the last few remaining, I guess, bastions trying to defend Jae'Sean Tate, because I do think in a world where you are trying to be a competitive team, he provides a lot of value. And I think that you maybe got lost in some of that this past season, especially because I think that there was maybe just a level of frustration with the way that the team was playing, the amount of losing again. Coach Steven Silas was obviously going to be on the way out. I think the players could probably feel it coming, like all of that. And I do think there was a level of certain guys just started focusing on getting theirs. And I think Jae'Sean maybe had been one of those guys as well, a victim of that entire circumstance. He's a guy that we know has point forward tendencies, can be a really good quality playmaker, can defend multiple positions on the floor, basically 1 through 4, maybe even 1 through 5 situationally. He's very PJ Tucker-esque in that regard. He's not the biggest, he's not the longest, he's not the tallest or the most athletic. He outworks other guys, though. He's a great locker room guy. He leads by example, even though he's a younger guy as far as NBA tenure. He's older because he's had, kind of that non-traditional route to making it to the league. So I do think other guys respect the work that he's put in. His biggest fallback, drawback as a player, a couple things, is he doesn't shoot the 3 ball well, unfortunately. And then he fouls. He fouls a lot. But he's also really adept at playing with 4 to 5 fouls. He's one of the most capable players in the NBA. When he picks up that 4th and 5th foul, he knows not to pick up the last ones.
Yeah, very high IQ.
Yes. So for all those reasons, I think Rockets fans have almost just got to a point where they're just trying to cast away Jae'Sean Tate. We know that internally the Rockets view Jae'Sean Tate as one of their most important pieces for all the reasons that I just laid out, the on-the-court production, the off-the-court production, or the off-the-court impact that he has on this young group. I'm not necessarily sitting here, unless there's a good deal out there that you have to include Jae'Sean Tate's salary for to make it happen. I'm not sitting here trying to flip Jae'Sean Tate just for the sake of getting rid of him. I think he's very clearly going to be one of your backup either 3 or 4 this upcoming season behind Dillon Brooks and or Jabari Smith Jr. and used situationally because he's a guy that unlocks a lot of special things on the floor.
Yeah, I'll be clear. I'm someone that's talked about potentially moving Tate in scenarios, but that's only for salary reasons or because I think you can potentially get real value for him in a way that outweighs his potential role here. Because let's be honest, look, he's a nice piece, but you're going to be starting Dillon Brooks at the 3, and the development of Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason is absolutely a priority.
And then obviously you're somewhere in that mix of wing players down the line is Cam Whitmore once he's actually up to speed at the NBA level. So it's not that Jae'Sean Tate has this long-term locked down position here in Houston, but while you're still in the, in the bridging the gap phase, I think he could be a valuable piece for this team.
And, they have experimented with him as a small ball 5 in the past, which is useful because of his ability to pass as well. That offsets some of the shooting limitations. And perhaps when you have a 6'7" athletic freak like Thompson at point guard, then you can be a little bit smaller in the middle with a Jae'Sean Tate or Jeff Green. That's something that Ime Udoka will have to experiment with in training camp. But look, it's going to be tough to give him a ton of minutes. I would say the way the roster is currently constructed, it feels like 15 to 20 is the most. So because of that, if you need his salary in a trade, or if there's a contender that's willing to value him at what I think he can be, which is a good 25 to 30 minutes per game role player in the right construct, then it might make sense for the Rockets to cash out. But assuming that opportunity is not there, yes, he still has value as a player. And my guess, the Rockets are just looking at him in, I suppose, a smaller version of the reason they got Dillon Brooks. They want guys that they can absolutely trust to bring it, to guard a lot of different positions, to throw their bodies around, to be physical. I mentioned earlier, there's a reason why the Rockets felt compelled to go 4 years on Dillon Brooks, and say what you will, he's just 27 years old. So I know we have concerns over the antics, but if Ime thinks he can keep those in check and he can keep him on the straight and narrow, then Dillon Brooks should still be a very good player at 30 years old. And Jae'Sean Tate's in his late 20s, but this is the type of guy who ages fairly well. He's under contract at a good rate for the next couple of years. And those are tone setters between Dillon, between Jae'Sean, between Fred VanVleet. Those are 3 players that you can trust to go out not just every game, but every practice and set a very high standard. I think we also know amongst the young guys that Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason, they are wired that way. They may not be there every single day yet because they are just 20, 21 years old. So there's some, maturation that's going to happen. And you're going to have days when you're that young that you're not fully dialed in. That's part of youth in the NBA. But I think over time, they're players that profile to have that same type of gene, that same type of chip on your shoulder. And I think the way the Rockets are looking at that is that if you have majority of guys on your practice court, I just talked about 5, I think you can throw Jock Landale into that mix as well, then the other guys that you're trying to develop, it makes it all the more difficult for a Jalen Green, a Kevin Porter Jr., and Alperen Sengun to take a possession off, to not fight through that screen.
Iron sharpens iron, Ben.
Yes, when everybody else on that roster has the right habits, that is fighting through those screens, that's doing all the little things, that is committed every single day, then it makes it all the harder for those young guys that have developed bad habits the last couple of years. It stands out a lot more when they do those things. And so I think that's part of the thing with the Rockets and Jae'Sean Tate, is that unless you have real value for him, i.e. what he should be able to fetch in terms of his value as a player, then you shouldn't trade him just to trade him. There's value in having him around as a player who plays and competes the right way and helps set a standard in training camp and the offseason practices, that this is how the other guys should conduct themselves. And that's the big difference this year. Obviously, Ime Udoka and his staff is step 1, but step 2 is having the right players around the young core. That's why they've talked about adding all these veterans through free agency, trades, what have you, so that it stands out a lot more when your young guys try and cut a corner, and hopefully they learn that that's not going to be tolerated this coming season the way it was the last 2.
That's going to do it for our Rockets headline roulette. We got through all the news and notes about your Houston Rockets. Ben, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yep. Ben DuBose on Twitter, the Logger Line on Twitter, the Rockets Wire on Twitter, and rocketswire.usatoday.com for all of your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Go there, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Drop your thoughts about the different Rockets headlines. Which is the most important headline in your eyes? Let us know in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.